the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Hello there from Bedford. How are you all? Are you well? I am back from Taipei and from emceeing the Honey Badger conference in Riga. I had an amazing time, so just a big thanks to Max and Roman for asking me, and I've also agreed to MC the event again next year, so looking forward to that. Anyway, welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast, which is brought to you by Kraken, the best place to buy and sell Bitcoin. And this week, I've got an interview with Ragnar Lifthrasir, looking into the complicated issue of gun ownership and also the alignment with Bitcoin. But before that, I do have a message from my show sponsors, so give them a listen. Don't skip them. It's these who make it possible for me to do this. So firstly, today's show is brought to you by my good friends over at BlockFi, and they have made some more cool announcements this week with regards to their interest accounts. They've dropped all minimum deposits. Interest account holders will no longer have to meet a minimum deposit amount in their Bitcoin, Ether, or GUSD balances in order to earn interest. Additionally, BlockFi has removed the early withdrawal penalty from their account and is now offering one free withdrawal per month for all clients. Add to this their recent announcement, BlockFi Flex, where you can choose to receive your interest payments in the currency of your choice. There is a whole bunch of cool stuff happening with these interest accounts. I'm also a customer. I've been using it for a number of months now. So if you are interested in finding out more, head over to blockfi.com, which is blockfi.com. Also, today's show is brought to you by the mighty Kraken, the most trusted place to buy and sell Bitcoin. I'm also going to be meeting up with the team over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be finding out all the cool new stuff they're working on, which I'll hopefully be able to tell you about shortly. But Kraken has the most comprehensive set of tools available for traders. They've got Kraken.com, the best place to buy, sell, and trade digital currencies. They offer margin trading with up to 5x leverage. They've got futures and they've got indices. They've got the Kraken OTC desk for large trades with private and personalized services. They've got Crypto Watch, where you can trade on multiple crypto exchanges from a single platform. And for you advanced traders out there, they have the best account management service in the business. If you're a trader, you should be definitely using Kraken. So join me in supporting them by heading over to kraken.com, which is Kraken.com. Okay, so on to the show, and this is an interesting one. It's something I've wanted to cover for a while. The issue of guns and ownership is a very complicated issue, and it's not one I take lightly, and I respect it because a large percentage of my listeners are from the US. I think it's over 50%. And I, like many others from countries which don't have liberal gun laws, I'm often shocked when you see these mass shootings, and I know they've become quite regular, but, when you are watching the news and you hear about another one, you can't help but sometimes question the ease of which you can own a gun in the US. I shot a gun for my first time out there when Jameson Lopp took me to a gun range when I did my first interview with him, which was like a year and a half ago now. And it was a really strange experience because I often compare it to going bowling, which might sound odd, but when you go to a range like the one I went to, you essentially have a series of lanes, like a bowling lane, and the people there were doing it were kind of just there for fun. There was a couple there were some guys there who were just mates. It felt like a very similar experience, but rather than throwing a bowling ball down the lane, you're shooting bullets out. But I did also get a new kind of respect for guns because I spent times in the shop and at the range talking to people who work there, having them explain their history of guns to me, what it means to their family, why it is such of cultural importance to them, and also learned a lot about safety with regards to guns. So yeah, that was an interesting experience, and it is a subject I've gone back and forth with for quite a while now. But as I mentioned, gun ownership does have an alignment with many Bitcoiners. I wanted to explore this on the podcast, and I have to be honest, I find it very difficult to navigate because I find it very difficult to come to rational and fair conclusions for everybody who's interested in this subject. Now, I understand and agree with the right for a person to want to defend themselves, but I also understand and appreciate that there are a bunch of people who do not want to live in an environment with liberal gun laws, especially with so many innocent victims of mass shootings. So prior to the recording of the show, I did drop a bunch of tweets out, some provocative, some asking different questions, because I wanted to see the feedback. And, certainly any idea of taking guns away from people was hit with a firm rejection. And, the majority of the people listening to my show are Bitcoiners. So the majority of the people following me on Twitter are going to be Bitcoiners. So I had to kind of respect the opinions of this. So yes, I wanted to make the show, and I reached out to Ragnar and said to him, can we do this? So while I was out at the Bitcoin Is event in LA, I sat down and spoke with him, And, he is obviously very pro-guns, but he is also very pro-Bitcoin. And he is currently trying to educate gun enthusiasts of the benefits of Bitcoin with his initiative, Guns and Bitcoin. So we get into a lot in this. We get into why guns are important to America, if owning a gun is a human right or an American right, and if there is a limit to the type of weapon that you should be able to buy. And we also touch on the topic of 3D gun printing, which is going to clearly make enforcing gun laws close to impossible. But we get into other subjects. We also discuss Bitcoin and privacy, and we get into the area of gender divide, because that's something Ragnar has touched on as well. So, yeah, a whole bunch of stuff here. Complicated interview, complicated subjects, but I will really look forward to the feedback on this because, look, I'm glad I did it, but yeah, I didn't come to any rational conclusions myself. Anyway, if you've got any questions about it, do reach out to me. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. Very quickly, I'm flying out to Wyoming tomorrow. I'm heading out to Caitlin Long's Wyo Hackathon. After that, I'm going to be heading to Crypto Springs, and then I'm going to be back in the US in October, heading out to Ohio, and then I'm going to be doing CIS in LA. You got any questions, you can reach out to me. As I said, my email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. So are you really going to cut your hair off if Bitcoin hits 100 grand?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Damn.
Absolutely. I'm dedicated. I mean, when it hits 100,000, my hair is least of my worries.
How long have you had your hair long for, though?
2 years, I guess.
Okay.
It took about 2 years to grow it.
Well, you can see I'm doing it at the moment.
Yeah.
This has been 7 months now of not cutting it.
It's starting to get in that stage where it's like not short, not long.
Yeah, so the hard bit's the bit where it just keeps falling down in front of you, and it looks terrible. Yeah. And then I'm now at the bit, because I can tuck it behind my ears, it's okay, but I can't tie it up. So, like, if I'm doing sports, it's all in my face.
Yep. David Beckham styles.
Yeah. Well, look, it's good to get you on the show.
Okay.
We've had a few run-ins, haven't we?
Once or twice.
Once or twice. I think we understand each other now a bit more.
Yeah, I think so. But that's Twitter for you.
Yeah, and also, I think you've got to meet people in person.
Yeah.
You kind of realize everyone's kind of cool. But I wanted to talk to you specifically, want to learn more about guns, which is great because they're a big part of you. And one of the things I've taken from following you and seeing you on Twitter is that, like, you're like all American. That's it. To me, you're all American, and I do remember things. And you've actually tweeted out about one of my shows once. Do you remember which one?
I don't. Jameson? No,
Andrew Torba.
Oh yeah, Andrew's. Yeah. I like Andrew. Respect him a lot.
So I'm kind of getting a picture of, like, if I want to learn a lot more about American values, culture, the Constitution, guns, because I've got some thoughts on guns. And I want to learn about it. You're obviously a great person to get on. So I think we'll get into some interesting areas here. And actually, it's quite timely. Look, there was another shooting yesterday.
Yeah, in Texas, West Texas.
7 killed, so it raises the debate again. And I threw myself into the conversation previously, and I think quite naively. And I've spoken to other people since, and I'm trying to understand it. I don't. And I tell you where I'm at is, like, obviously my opinion doesn't matter, but I could never see in any way how guns could be taken out of America, and I understand why. I understand why it's part of the culture. At the same time, I would never want it brought in my country in the same way.
Yeah,
I don't think we could handle it. So let's get into it. Okay. And I've got some questions. Let's start with why you're more than just a gun owner. You're more than just a gun shooter. You're actually, in some ways, you're a supporter of guns and the right to own a gun, and this goes way into the Constitution. So let's dig into this. You tell me about this, why it's an important issue for you.
Well, guns are important to me for the same reason that Bitcoin is important to me. It's a matter of self-defense, self-sovereignty, being able to defend myself and not rely on other people. Bitcoin, obviously, you don't rely on banks, central banks, credit cards, PayPal, and guns to me are the same thing. Don't rely on the police, the military. It's sort of your last line of insurance. So just like Bitcoin is sort of insurance against tyrants and the big banks and all the bad stuff they do, guns are insurance against, hey, the police don't show up. Hey, you actually do get attacked. Hey, there's a war, the state takes over. So it's mostly about insurance and thinking of worst case scenario and independence. And both are fun. Bitcoin's fun, guns are fun, and a lot of people don't understand the culture of Bitcoin, they don't understand the culture of guns. So I understand why both are controversial and are hard for some people to understand.
And I understand the alignment with them both as well. I've shot guns twice now. I just shot a gun out in Vietnam, but the first time I ever shot a gun, do you know about this?
I think I saw you tweet about it, like with Jameson
Yeah,
Lopp.
Jameson Lopp.
I think
So I'd never shot a gun in my life. It was my third episode. I emailed Jameson. I saw this picture of this dude on Twitter with a big gun, with a hat on saying "Make Bitcoin Great Again." I was like, "Who's this guy?"
yeah.
Like I was
Yeah.
brand new, and so
Yeah.
I emailed him and said, "Look, can I interview you and can you take me to shoot a gun?" And he did, and the whole experience taught me a lot more about guns. It made me respect them more because I didn't realize how fucking powerful they are.
Yeah.
Like it blew my mind.
Yeah.
But also speaking to the people there, I understood a lot more about the culture. You know, I was chatting to one of the ladies who worked there. She's told me they've got 37 guns in their house. And the other thing about it was the experience. I've always said it was very much like going bowling
Bowling.
because it was a set of lanes.
Yep.
And the people there was a couple, a husband and wife. There was two buddies there hanging out. There was somebody on their own. I was like, this is just like, you know, on a Saturday, I'm going to go bowling, or on a Saturday, I'm going to go and shoot a gun. So what was your upbringing with it? Is it part of your family? Did your dad introduce you to guns?
Yeah, my history with guns is kind of complicated. I mean, I grew up around guns. My dad had a revolver on each nightstand, which, looking back, was probably not wise. You're supposed to keep them locked in a case when you have kids around. But we just knew not to touch the guns. We were all afraid of my dad in a way. You know, he was a big guy. So guns were never strange to me, I guess. And of course, all of our friends and family had guns. But it got complicated when I was 16. My dad killed himself, and he shot himself with one of his revolvers.
Okay, wow. Sorry, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I've never shared that publicly, but you know, now that we're talking about guns and I'm launching Guns in Bitcoin, I guess I should probably put it out there so that people understand. I understand the consequences of guns, and I understand why people oppose them. And I do think a lot about, you know, like the shooting that just happened in West Texas. I think it was yesterday. So I'm not just some guy spouting off a libertarian idea. I mean, this is real shit for me.
Shit, okay. Wow. So you were 16?
Yeah, 16.
Were you at school?
This was during the summer, so I was actually surfing, and I was walking back up, and my mom picked me up. I didn't have a car yet. I think I just turned 16. Yeah, I just turned 16. And so I was walking up, and my mom got out of the car and said, "Your dad is dead. He killed himself."
Fuck. Okay. Shit. Okay, so obviously I'm not prepared for that. I didn't know that was coming.
It's okay. I've never shared that, so it's okay.
Okay. I mean, we'll talk about that another time as well. I'll probably have a beer with you about that. Okay, so at that point, did that not turn you against guns at all for a period?
You know, I kind of didn't think about it because I was so overwhelmed with the whole event and things that led up to it. But yes, after that, I didn't get involved with guns again until college because my buddies all shot guns. So we'd go out on the weekends and shoot. And it was fun, but it kind of caused me to have some nightmares thinking about some things like my dad. And I didn't then own a gun for several years because when I would pick up a gun, I would think of him and what happened, and just kind of bad visuals come into my head. But eventually, you know, healed a little bit and worked my way back into it. And now I'm obviously very comfortable with guns. I love it. I shoot all the time.
Okay. How's your mum doing?
She's fine. Yeah, you know, family's fine. You just kind of, just like anything, you get tough and move on.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that because that's obviously quite personal. Okay, so as an outsider, someone from the UK, where we have very strict gun laws, people can own guns, but they have to go through a very difficult and stringent licensing process. They have to have their cabinets checked. It's very rare for someone to own a gun. You don't really see them about. Here in the US, it's obviously very different because it's been part of the culture since you could probably explain to me better. For those who don't understand, talk to me about the Constitution and how this is embedded in the Constitution, why this is so important for Americans.
So it's perfect that you're British because I've seen a big disconnect between Europeans and Americans, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's good that you're British and we talk about this. Obviously, America started because we were armed and we fought off the British.
You kicked us out.
Yeah. And if it wasn't for the guns, and specifically citizens owning guns, we didn't have the American army. It was just regular citizens having guns, there wouldn't be America as we know it. We would still be a British colony or just British. We'd be part of the UK. So one reason why guns is so important here is because that's what created America. And If we think America is great, we have to say that that's one reason why we have what we have.
And people often talk about their last line of defense against a tyrannical government. And I understand that point, but it feels a little bit outdated. I feel like if you had a tyrannical government, I don't see how people with guns would be able to stop them, because there's like a different level of weaponry and military these days. You know, back then it was guns v guns, and maybe the Brits had some, I don't know, some cannons or horses. I mean, I don't know the full history of the war beyond what I see in Hamilton, but it's very different now. But at the same time, I have seen some of these kind of groups, these militant groups, who've, in certain areas, they've kind of barricaded themselves in. Is that like an example? Is it more like it can be a demonstration, or do you fundamentally believe that the people could rise up against a tyrannical government?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's probably the first.
The militias.
Yeah, I think that argument that, okay, why do you need guns against the state? Because the state is so much more powerful. It is kind of outdated or maybe somewhat ridiculous. So that's, I think, the most common counter argument to the need for guns against the state. And actually the history for thousands of years has been smaller forces against larger forces, and smaller forces using asymmetrical advantages against larger states. So if you look at Revolutionary War, Americans were outgunned, they weren't a formal army, and beat back the British. Vietnam, Afghanistan, these are all examples of much smaller forces defending and ultimately winning in a certain way against much larger forces. Iraq.
I was just in Vietnam, and we did the tour of the tunnels in South Vietnam, and it was incredible. I didn't realize, I obviously knew it was kind of a guerrilla army, like, they didn't have much money. I didn't actually realize what they were doing is they were collecting the bombs that were dropped by the Americans and then reusing the metal to build weapons their side. It's incredible.
Yeah, so it's not just, people just think in terms of weapons, okay, like the government has missiles and jets, and all you have is an AR-15, but like Vietnam is a good example where they were more motivated. They knew the lay of the land more, they were more willing to sacrifice themselves, and they were more innovative because they had to be. So yeah, so smaller, poorly armed people can definitely defeat a larger army, and especially in the US, because we're just so well trained, and there's way more people with weapons than there are police and military. Also, the police and military in the US at least will only go so far. So it's actually less likely to have tyranny here because we're so well armed. So just a matter of deterrence. I think deterrence is kind of the key word when it comes to the state.
Yeah.
And for example, a couple of weeks ago, there's a guy in Philadelphia who, it was a guy, and he was just running around the city shooting, and he had the entire police department after him, and he basically held up the entire city, one guy.
Right.
So you could imagine what 30 guys could do. You could shut down a city with just 2 snipers.
Well, yeah, and I've also seen with these militias, there is always a reluctance to actually, there's a reluctance for a shootout. There's a reluctance when,
absolutely.
What was the one? It was to do with a farmland or something.
Yeah, Vegas. I was just going to bring that up. So militia is a great point. So obviously the Revolutionary War, they were militias. And now we still have militias to this day. So what you're referring to happened outside of Las Vegas, and it was Clive Bundy was his name. So it was a rancher who basically hadn't been paying, I think it was grazing fees to the federal government, because it was federal government land that he was leasing, and he didn't believe he needed to pay that. So that's a different argument. Anyway, so they were going to basically seize his land and kick him off. But these militias sort of came together from different parts, different states, and they were all well armed, and they basically said, this is our stand. We are not going to stand for this. So when you send in, the federal officers, we're going to stand up to them. And fortunately, no shots were fired, and the federal government eventually left because they were just trying to deter them, these militias.
So that's a great example, really.
Yeah, and that was only like 2 or 3 years ago, and that was called the Battle of Bunkerville, even though no shots were fired.
Yeah.
And that also shows that, federal law enforcement, local law enforcement is actually very hesitant to do that because it's immoral, I think, and maybe from PR perspective, and they know these people really are serious. They really will shoot.
But I found that an impressive episode. That wouldn't happen ever in the UK like that because we don't have guns. And like I said, I still don't want them introduced in the same way.
Yeah.
Because I think it's too big a change, and I think there are cultural differences.
Yeah.
How would you feel though? Say for whatever reason, say you married a British girl, you wanted to go and live in England. We obviously have very different rules. Would you have the feeling that you would want the UK to change? Would you have the feeling that you think we should be the same? And do you think all people should have this? Like, do you see it more as a human right than an American right?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. If you're a country that doesn't have guns, then should they be introduced or why should they not? And that's also a good point you made. America already has guns, so no matter what you think, they're not going anywhere. So that's actually the reality. There's no point in even talking about removing guns because it's never going to happen. The UK and most other countries, guns aren't really there. So to answer your question, if I move to the UK, would I want them to change? Absolutely. I would want to be able to defend my life. I think that's the first right, is being able to defend yourself and especially your wife, your family.
And I guess that's more relevant and more likely than a tyrannical government. That, we have incidents every day of people having homes broken into and being attacked. So I guess that's a more likely scenario.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So crime statistically is more likely than the state imposing on you, definitely. But I would say the state being tyrannical is a greater existential threat. So it's a classical case of statistics versus the gravity of something happening. So crime more likely, but probably less of an overall threat. The state less likely, but a bigger, existential threat.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the mass shootings because they are very emotional when they happen. We had one yesterday, included a 2-year-old, ended up in hospital with glass from the shattering of a window. 7 people, I believe, were killed now. We've had 2 other shootings quite recently that were in quick succession. We've had Sandy Hook. We've had lots of different incidents. Statistically, they're quite rare, but emotionally, they trigger. How do you feel whenever you hear of one of these incidents? Does it ever challenge your own views on guns, on weaponry? Because I have heard you talk about the best defense against guns is another gun. But in the scenario yesterday, when someone's being randomly shot at from a car, there's no time, you're waiting for the police to come and end this. So it's a different scenario. How do you process these, and does it ever challenge your own thoughts?
Yeah, these mass shootings are obviously incredibly tragic, and I feel for them having been, having my dad killed himself with a gun. And so, yes, I've had to go through that emotional process, because you're right, it's actually statistically rare. You're much more likely to be killed by, a bowling ball or something dumb or a car accident. So statistically, they're actually rare. Statistically, this isn't a big increase. It's more emotional, so it's on the media. So how do I think what I think of those? Yeah, it's tragic. It affects me emotionally, but I also have to think logically, right? We have 2 parts of us, emotional and logical, and we need to use both. So just like when my dad died, I spent years trying to process that and figure it out. And I thought, if there weren't guns, if we were in the UK and he probably wouldn't have owned a gun, would he still be alive today? I don't know. I mean, I have to ask myself that all the time. But the conclusion I came to was, yes, it's terrible, but it doesn't justify taking away the most fundamental right to defend yourself, even if it sometimes have very terrible consequences. And one comparison, and maybe it's a bad one, is like the internet. So look at all the great things the internet gives us, but people use it for awful things. Primarily, I would say the worst is child pornography. Do we want to take away the internet because of these awful things? I think most people would say no. In fact, I think we have said no. The difference with the internet is that it's not a human right. And you could say you don't actually kill people with the internet, but you greatly harm people, or you can organize terrorism or something. So yes, it's terrible emotionally. No one wants to see people killed, but let's also look at the rational argument, statistics, math, philosophy of rights. And for me, it comes out without any doubt that yes, we should still have guns.
Do you think there needs to perhaps be a change in the laws? And actually, talk me through and explain to me, if I'm an American citizen, I want to buy a gun today, I'm under the impression I can pretty much just go into a store and buy a gun like I can buy a can of soda. Is that true, or is that a myth?
That's a myth. So most gun laws are at the state level.
Okay.
And you see a lot of variation. Here in California, it's the worst state for guns. I mean, you have a 2-week waiting period, extensive background check. Now you have to do a background check just to buy ammo. So it varies a lot by state. But yes, in Idaho, Arizona, you can go into a store, buy a gun, and leave the store with that gun.
What ID do you have to show?
I think just a driver's license.
Do you have to be an American citizen?
Yes.
Okay, so you have to say, I couldn't just go and buy one.
Correct.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think is the best balance here in the laws? Because a 2-week delay sounds to me like a good thing. It sounds to me like if somebody is feeling irrational, crazy, like they want to go and do something stupid, it's almost a bit of breathing space. And it does feel like background checks are important, but also, what are they looking for in the background to say you can't have a gun?
So for me, the right balance is just to stick to the Constitution and what the Second Amendment says, which is these rights shall not be infringed. It's the only amendment that says that, shall not be infringed. It was very explicit. So the right balance is having no infringements. What that means is that you take away that right after crime has been committed, not before. So just like you don't have a 2-week waiting period to use the internet or to be able to publish a book or to exercise any other rights, but that right can be taken away justifiably if there's a crime committed. So to answer your question, I think you can take away guns. You could definitely have different laws around it if someone is first found guilty, like maybe they abuse their spouse or any sort of violent crime, absolutely should be taken away. But you can't take away a right before a crime has been committed.
Right, so you don't believe in the 2-week wait, but you do believe in punishment post-action. What are the things in the background checks they're looking for? Have you been to prison? Is that a reason?
So the background checks are any violent crime, actually any crime at all.
Okay.
And I think any felony will disqualify you. It might depend on the state, but it's generally criminal background, especially felons, especially violent felonies. But I don't believe in the 2-week waiting period. First of all, it's an infringement, straight up. But I once dated a girl who was divorced, and her husband had beat her several times. She ended up in the hospital, and she went to buy a gun. Fortunately, there wasn't a 2-week waiting period in Nevada, and her husband came to her house. So what if she was in California, 2-week waiting period, her husband threatened her, she had to wait 2 weeks, but he broke into the house and beat her again before that happened.
Okay, no, you make a very good point there. Okay, what is the lightest felony that you could have that would prevent you from owning a gun? So what's is there any kind of basic crime you could have done?
I don't know, and it might vary by state. I don't know if it's just any felony or it's a certain violent.
Well, let me tell you the point I'm getting to. I understand if somebody has a history of gun violence, they should probably not have a gun. I understand somebody has a history of maybe any form of violence, you would not want them to have a gun. But there might be somebody who's committed quite a minor crime, but because of that, their background checks doesn't allow them to have a gun, and that feels like that therefore is still infringed upon their rights.
Yeah, so again, I think it goes back to being consistent with when we can justify taking away rights.
Okay.
So yes, I think you have to have, the crime has to be related to violence or anything that harms someone else. It starts to get murky. For example, I know someone who had a felony, but it was really just the cops who had trumped up the charges and were basically screwed him over, and he couldn't get a gun for 10 years. So it starts to get into a gray area.
You get into, I guess, a disadvantage.
Yeah, and that's the thing against the state is they can kind of, once they have one thing against you,
We'll get into the state because I know you're going to have some views on that. I've got a couple of other areas I wanted to cover though. Again, I understand the guns. What about these high-powered, crazy-ass assault rifles? Do you think there's no limit to the weapons that you should be able to buy, or do you think there becomes a certain limit that the population should be able to buy? Because, I mean, assault rifles, I understand why somebody might enjoy them. They might think that's a cool gun. They enjoy shooting it. But some of the thing that happened in Vegas, the shooting from the Mandalay Bay, that was with a high-powered assault rifle, right? So where do you sit on that? And is there an upper limit? Because I've heard people put out these crazy things like, I think I even did it just to test the water, to say, well, if I should be able to own an assault rifle, can I own a tank? Where do you put the limit?
Yeah. To me, there is no limit simply because you have a right to defend yourself from criminals or the state, so you should be able to be armed as much as possible. If you if you commit a crime, those should be taken away from you. So first about the high-powered assault rifles, those are all kind of media words. So assault rifle is somewhat meaningless.
Okay.
Second, they're not actually that high-powered like your classic AR-15. The round is not that powerful. It's only a .556. There's much bigger rounds like the .308.
What does that mean?
So obviously every bullet has a certain size and power.
Okay.
Basically. And so the common bullet in the AR-15 is not that powerful compared to like even hunting rounds. Like a bigger one would be the .308. And there's much bigger, more powerful rounds than what you'd find in the AR-15. And in fact, if you're doing like an urban situation, like most of these shootings are with an AR-15, you know, at a school or an office or a city, you actually don't want a more powerful round for various reasons. It's harder to shoot at high rounds. So the whole assault rifle, high-powered rounds, is just has nothing to do with reality and from a tactical point of view. And kind of your second question is, what's the limit? I don't see any limit because the state doesn't have a limit on their weapons.
I thought you might say that. Okay, so I should be able to, if I want to buy a tank, if I want to put landmines around my house, if I want to buy a guided missile, a nuclear bomb. Do you see what I mean? It's not going to happen. But the point, I understand that. Within the gun community, you know, you've obviously going to have a lot of friends who shoot, right? Mm-hmm. Do most people kind of align and feel the same, or are there kind of factions where they have different views on guns and ownership and licensing? Like, do you debate this with your friends?
Well, you know, there's so many Americans that own guns. I can't remember the figure, but obviously it's a very large figure. So there's a large variety of people with different opinions, obviously. But I think most feel the same way that I do, that it shall not be infringed. Generally, I think that's the dominant view. And everyone that I know that I go shooting with, that's their view as well. And
so what would you say to people like where I'm from the UK, or people who are going to be listening to this are going to be going, you're just a fucking crazy gun nut, this is bullshit, people are getting killed. How can people educate themselves better? I'm going to throw one in. Shooting a gun helped educate me better and go into a gun rage. Mm-hmm. I became more open-minded to it. But how do you respond to that? What would you say to people to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, what if you live in a very safe place, like New Zealand, Switzerland, the UK, but not so much lately? Then why do you need a gun if there's actually little crime and your government is relatively benign? Norway, right? Low crime, pretty benign government. Well, again, you could say it's an insurance policy if things ever do change. And this especially is true for Europe. I'm really surprised at the anti-gun sentiment in Europe. When you look at the history of Europe and how many times there's been wars between countries and then themselves. So if anything, the Europeans should be very pro-gun. It's kind of strange to me.
It could be a little bit PTSD. It's interesting the countries you listed there, though, because you listed New Zealand that just very recently had a mass shooting. And you listed Norway, which had possibly the worst mass shooting that I can think of. Yeah. We had one in the UK years ago when I was a child in an area called Hungerford. In the UK, a guy, Michael, I think his name was Michael Ryan, he went on the rampage with guns, shot I think 15 people. So it has happened. We have Dunblane as well, which is sends shivers down my spine. That was the Scottish school where I can't remember the guy. So it has happened. Mm-hmm. People who've wanted to do it have been able to. We also have a massive knife problem in the UK at the moment, a really, really big knife problem, especially in London, and it's growing now in Birmingham. So we do have issues in these countries. We do have them. I myself would be reluctant to own a gun, but if I moved here, which I would love to do, it would be a consideration of mine.
So this gets into a pretty controversial point, which is, yes, the mass shootings, we've already talked about the emotional aspect, the statistical thing. So we don't need to talk about that too much, but I think we're talking now about two things. One is the makeup of the people where you live. Demographics change. So if you look at the number one predictor of crime, the number one thing is a fatherless home. Fatherless home is the number one predictor of all crime. So when we start talking about like the knife problem that has popped up or these mass shootings, the mass shootings generally tend to be people who are either mentally ill, or if you look at the background, that's the real issue. So I think the more important thing is to talk about, the family and fathers and everything like that. That's actually the core of most of these issues: knife violence, gun violence, everything else. But it's a more complicated problem, so people don't want to take that approach. And you look at peaceful countries, the families are generally better. And if you look at places in the US with terrible crime, families are in a totally bad condition. Brazil, Mexico, Latin America, all these violent countries have poor families.
Right, and that's rarely brought up in the mainstream media. I've seen the debates every time there's a shooting. It becomes this kind of almost binary argument. We need to change the gun laws.
people aren't raising that as an issue in mainstream media.
Yeah, because it's kind of boring and it's a complicated subject and it's a harder thing to solve. And when you look at history, I'd say we have a real plague of mental illness in the country, because it wasn't too long ago where it was very common for everyone to own a gun. You can buy a gun through the mail. They used to have shooting clubs at high school. Like my parents, you'd go to high school and you'd be in the shooting club and you'd bring your rifle and put it in your locker. So guns hasn't changed. It's the same guns for the last 100, 200, 300 years. What has changed, I think, is sort of the breakdown of the family and the lack of mental health resources, especially in the U.S. We're really bad at that.
Next up, I talked to Ragnar more about guns and the alignment with Bitcoin, but before that, I do have a message from my amazing sponsors. So, firstly, let's talk about Dropbit, the best mobile Bitcoin wallet out there. I've been telling you about these now for 4 or 5 months. Love these guys, love working with them. They are like a Venmo for Bitcoin. They're always trying to give you the easiest way to send and receive Bitcoin. So if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. They've got the usual scanning of the QR codes and pasting of addresses, but additionally, they've got a couple of extra very cool features. They allow you to firstly text Bitcoin to your friends, and you can also tweet Bitcoin to people. Super cool, and lots of interesting cool stuff coming soon. Hopefully an announcement very, very soon. It's available for iPhone and Android. Just head over to dropbit.app, which is dropbit.app. And also, today's show is brought to you by my new sponsor, MyBookie. And at the end of a hard week, it's great to sit down, take some time off, and watch some football. I have become a bit of a fan of the NFL over the last few years, especially traveling back and forth to the US, hanging out with some of you Americans, finding out your teams, going to some games, and it always makes a game more exciting to have a bet on it. So do the smart thing, head over to mybookie.ag, as nobody gives you more ways to win than they do. MyBookie's got the fastest payouts and better lines than any other sportsbook. I would not recommend them if I don't think they are the best, and because they accept Bitcoin, they're absolute badasses. So if you're going to bet on football this season, bet with MyBookie. And they have a special offer for the listeners of my show. Join now, and MyBookie will double your first deposit. Just use the promo code WBitcoin to activate that offer. That's promo code WBITCOIN. Okay, if you want to find out more, if you want to sign up, head over to mybookie.ag, which is MYBOOKIE.ag.
The other area of guns which I'm really intrigued by and fascinated by is the 3D printing of guns.
Oh, yeah.
The ability, therefore, for somebody to be able to download something off the internet and print a gun. Now, look, it's not that easy now, but you can see the direction the technology is going. I think I saw a guy on Twitter, I saw it with a gun, and his only problem is the last bullet was jamming. He's put a round in, he's got like 20 bullets. I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology here, but this was a 3D printed gun. Mm-hmm. This seems to be a liberating idea, but also potentially a dangerous idea, because it does circumvent any laws. Like, for example, you agree that perhaps people who've got a violent past shouldn't be able to get guns. Mm-hmm. This would allow them to circumvent that. How do you feel about this area? Because it's kind of very interesting.
Yeah, I've gotten heavily into the 3D gun printing world. I don't own a 3D printer. I don't own any 3D printed guns, but I've gotten heavily into it, and I actually have interviewed several 3D gun printing guys for my podcast. So I think I have a pretty good grasp on the technology and the implications. This is a great comparison to Bitcoin, because now you're able to route around the state, and 3D gun printing actually renders null gun control. You basically cannot really have it because you can make it at home. The state doesn't know you have it. No one really knows you have it. So it changes the debate completely. Just like Bitcoin is no longer about permission and registration. You have to be registered. Now it's the same thing. You have this technology that can do some really great things and liberating, but there's going to be some bad guys now who previously might have been stopped. So it's a major parallel. And are 3D printed guns scary? Yes, but the net result, I think, will be much better, and the technology is getting better every day. Like, I can't even keep up with what's going on, and I'm involved almost every day in the Keybase groups, And they're going to be just as good as regular guns eventually, if not better. Actually, there's more innovation now because guys in their garages are constantly innovating, tinkering.
Well, I look at the cannabis industry, right? Okay, so it's still illegal in the UK. I think it's like 47 states in the US. It's either now legal or decriminalized, and it's really professionalized the industry in a different way. You know, before, if you want to buy weed, you meet a guy in a car park, you get a bag of weed, you go home, you smoke it, right? Now you've got unlimited delivery devices. You go to a store and it's like an Apple store. You've got people behind the counter who could advise you what you want for whatever reason you want to smoke for. There's anxiety, whether you want CBD because you've got an injury. I actually ordered online yesterday. I ordered a Pax and 3 of the cartridges, and it was delivered in 20 minutes. This kind of innovation is interesting. I find the 3D gun printing kind of scary. I find it a bit more scary for me in the UK because it circumvents and changes the game in an entirely different way. All right, well, listen, look, appreciate you being candid and especially open up about your father. I didn't know about that. We'll probably have a beer and a chat about that sometime. I do want to talk to you a bit more about the state, being anti-state. I would definitely have classified myself pre-Bitcoin as a statist because I didn't know any other option. For me, it was, we have the state runs our country. I vote every 4 years, 5 years in an election, which party I want, and that's the only way there can be. Bitcoin has obviously changed the game. It opens your mind to these libertarian ideals. It opens your mind to actually how bad the state is, how many terrible things they've done. But I also find the transition to be an anti-state quite difficult. There's things I struggle with. Firstly, I struggle with the fact that I think humans naturally organize themselves. They naturally do. I struggle with the idea of no state. I struggle how that will be. And I've spoken to different people. I think it's Francis Poulier is very much he's a minarchist, so he believes in a minimal state. I was chatting to Stefan Rivera recently about the possibility of no state. Where do you fit within this whole picture?
Yeah, well, like you said, people organize themselves, and there's always going to be a form of governance. I mean, look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin, there's no state. It's not state money. It's anarchy, but yet there's pretty powerful governance. So, yeah, I'm definitely an anarchist. I don't think we're ever going to have anarchy across the country. I think anarchy occurs in very small communities, a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand. An interesting example of this are like Muslim communities, actually, in the UK maybe. They actually start to govern themselves. They have their own language, their own stores, their own courts, as far as I understand it, and to a certain extent some policing, although I'm not as clear about that. But just by being a tight-knit community who have ways of repelling outsiders in the state, they are functionally their own state in a way. So anarchy is just a small state at a smaller level with a different setup. And Bitcoin shows that anarchy can work at a certain scale with certain conditions. And the one thing I never hear anyone talking about when it comes to anarchy is the type of people you need. Because the fact is there's some demographics that can govern themselves better than others. And that's why, like in Norway, they don't have a lot of crime because Norwegians aren't that dangerous.
Yeah.
We're dangerous in America. So anarchy also depends on the type of people that are going to do it.
Okay. One of the things that I've also struggled with is being a statist has been used as an insult. If you hold certain opinions at a certain point, like you know me, I throw myself into the debates on Twitter because I want to learn, and I'll happily stand on one side of an opinion to see what people say and on the other. And it's really useful for me to learn, to research, to see different opinions and get guests. I've been called a statist a number of times, and it's definitely a derogatory term. So then I asked recently, I said, if you vote, are you a statist?
Yeah, if you vote, you're a statist. That's a little more complicated because on one hand you have to be practical.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, like I would rather have one president be president than someone else be president. And that person being president will affect my rights. So it's always this sort of internal battle of how practical do I want to be versus if I vote, I'm saying the state is legitimate. And so it's this complicated thing. I don't vote. I don't get involved really with politics much at all. I'm focused more on technology. For example, I was always like a one-issue voter when I did used to vote, and it was always gun rights.
Okay.
But now with 3D printed guns, I realize technology is what allows us to go past politics. Same with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
We no longer need to vote about the Federal Reserve or monetary policy because of technology. Technology just gets around all that. And so for me, with guns, I've pretty much accepted that we are going to have worse and worse gun control laws because of changing demographics. So I'm just focusing now on 3D printed guns and less about being politically active.
Right, so you just kind of keep out of that now. That's your issue. That's what you're dedicating yourself to. And actually, I really do see the alignment between guns and Bitcoin. I totally understand. I also see Bitcoin actually as it feels a very, very American idea. It really does. And I wrote it down here on my lesson here. Just it feels a very American thing. Let's dig into Bitcoin a bit as well, because you've obviously been around for a while. I don't actually know your full background. Like, are you like a 2011 Bitcoin?
Yeah,
year?
2011 is when I got involved in Bitcoin.
So you got involved. You've obviously seen a lot of change in Bitcoin, right? You've been here since pretty much the start, like 8 years. Did you always have the conviction we would get to say where we are now? Because it's pretty impressive. Or did you just think it was just like a bit of fun at the time?
I am surprised at how high the price is. I remember when we broke 1,000 and I was surprised. So the price now is, I still can't believe it. People are complaining, oh, it's 10,200. It used to be 11,000. What am I going to do with my life? And,
like, get a fucking grip.
yeah, get a grip. I'm just happy it's over 1,000. So I always knew it was going to stick around in some form. I didn't think it was ever going to go to zero, as people say. But I never knew the adoption or the price. Just because of the principles and how it's designed, and I've kind of dedicated myself to it. It completely changed my life to what I was doing before. But yeah, it has surprised me, especially on the price.
And where we are now in coming up to 2020, the price is interesting. I don't check the price very regularly at all anymore. That was a mistake. I don't check the price. I just still stack my sats as we're meant to do. But as you follow like the growth of the technology and the growth of Bitcoin, what are some of the most important things to you? I'll throw mine in first. Mine is, I think we need to grow the pie. I think we as a Bitcoin community, I know we're not meant to say that term, but I think we're talking to each other a lot. I think we need to grow the pie. That's where I'm dedicating myself for the future. It's like, how do we take Bitcoin to more people? What are the things that are most interesting you at the moment with Bitcoin?
To me, what interests me the most about Bitcoin has always been the same. I don't think it's changed. For me, it's about being able to transact and not have that transaction be censored, number one, and number two, privacy. So partly what got me involved in Bitcoin was I had a small construction business that I had just kind of started, and my main form of payment was PayPal, because it was too much in cash, $10,000 at a time in cash didn't work.
Yep.
I wasn't going to accept checks at those amounts. So PayPal was it. One day they closed my account, didn't tell me why. For me to find out, I had to get a subpoena or basically a court order, and that really did some damage to my business. So it's always been being able to, again, kind of insurance, being able to transact, first of all. And second, privacy. And that's my one big concern about Bitcoin is the lack of privacy. And so my focus is more on privacy, and I've talked about this on Twitter, especially lately, about trying to get more local trading going on with people that you know, because everyone buys their Bitcoin on exchanges, 99%, and that's a huge, huge problem. And the biggest threat and weakness is Bitcoin is that, and we're all too lazy to give up that convenience.
Right, so you believe there should be more person-to-person cash transactions.
Yeah, that's how it started. I mean,
how do we organize that though?
So what I proposed on Twitter a couple weeks ago is meetup groups, they should set some time apart to just do some trades, $10, $20 with people at the meetup group. And then like events, like conferences today, it would be great if they had set some time apart or a room where people can do that. And same with the meetup groups, just making some friends, just getting to know people you start to trust. I mean, when I got into it, that's how I bought Bitcoin for a long time. That was sort of the only way, through local Bitcoins. And to this day, I do what I can. So to answer your question, how do you do that? Local meetup groups, conferences, gain some trust with people, and then you could transact across country. Like you and I could buy some Bitcoins from you when you go back to Europe.
Okay, so that's getting past the kind of onboarding, offboarding, the bit where we can be tracked and then be traced. What about privacy built into the protocol? How do you feel about that at the moment? So I had to play with Wasabi Wallet, and I found it very confusing, and CoinJoin, and I got lost in all that. Do you believe that we or the devs should be focusing on building on-chain privacy, or do you think that's too risky?
With Bitcoin, it's so hard to change the protocol, so I don't think it's realistic, at least at the base layer, to do big changes in privacy, although that is coming with different technologies. In terms of relying on, CoinJoin, Wasabi, even Samurai, all those techniques are pretty much hard to use realistically. And so that solution, different wallets, are always going to be limited to a very, very small number of pretty advanced users. So I don't think that's a great solution, although it's very important, because I use it, but it's not a big solution. So that's why I'm focusing on more, person-to-person, OTC type of transactions, because it doesn't rely on technology, doesn't rely on a lot of skill. It's just like if I were to buy your bike from Craigslist, like you and I both know how to do that. Same with Bitcoin. It's a very simple, elegant solution, and it worked for a number of years.
Okay. How do you feel about Lightning, and what's your exposure to Lightning so far?
I'm just now getting into Lightning. To me, it's very tedious and high risk. We just added it on the Guns and Bitcoin store. It wasn't that easy to set up. So to me, it's still very experimental, and I'm not that enthusiastic about it, just because I'm like the grumpy old man in Bitcoin. Like I'm a very fundamental user, but I definitely think it's gonna bring in new people, like you were talking about.
Yeah, so I have mixed views on Lightning as well. I allow people to buy a subscription to the podcast without ads, and 3 people have paid with Lightning, and the speed is brilliant. Yeah. Seeing that speed is utterly brilliant. Yeah. But at the same time, I find it at the moment too difficult to use. I almost feel like you're having to learn Bitcoin again. Like it's, for me, it's not close enough to the experience of using the base chain. Yeah. And that's something I struggled with, because even just the creating of an invoice, I had to create an invoice for somebody, and then the invoice timed out. I much prefer a situation where they could just, here's an address, just send it to the address that we have with Bitcoin. And so the experiences are too different for me at the moment. But I also get nervous about being critical about Lightning, because it's like...
Yeah, well, being critical about anything in Bitcoin is tough. Yeah, I'm the same, and I think why people are so excited about Lightning is 2 things. Number one, it's a new way to make money. You can build a business around it, you can build a reputation around it. And the second reason is because it's pretty high tech, and people love new things, and it's very innovative. For me, where I am is I'm just trying to learn about it. We have it at Guns and Bitcoin. I had a bunch of people give me a hard time because we didn't accept it. And once we implement it, no one has bought anything with Lightning. So that's just how it is.
It sounds like the Roger Ver world, where he pesters people to accept Bitcoin Cash and nobody uses it.
And no one uses it, yeah. So it's a good development in Bitcoin, but I'm not too heavy into it.
Right. Well, listen, we're here at Bitcoin Is, which is going to be a cool event. I've got 2 last things I want to cover with you. One of them's slightly controversial, because it's based on following some tweets you sent previously. Bitcoin is very male-dominated. It's a very male-dominated industry. I would say probably 90% of my guests have been male. There are some great females in here. There's sometimes a push to try and improve diversity in Bitcoin events, and a push to have, say, more females given a platform. But you're not 100% keen on this, are you?
I'm not.
Yeah. Do you mind talking about it?
Absolutely. It's actually one of my favorite topics.
Okay, great. Because I did want to talk to you about this, because as a podcaster, I interact with everyone. Yeah. And I try and speak to every person possible, and I want to get everybody included. I've had a long chat with a few different females in the space about their experience. I don't want to draw attention to it too much, but I'm interested in your opinion, because I think diversity is a good thing, but I'm not always keen on diversity which causes reverse discrimination as well. I'm aware of that point. Yeah. But at the same time, I am supportive of people who are trying to bring different cultures, people, races, genders into Bitcoin, because you may bring in different use cases. So, but I know you've got an issue here.
I'm not afraid to speak my mind on this. Okay. What's fun about talking about this is there's a lot of subtleties actually to it, and there's a lot of contradictions to people who push it. So my view is this: you treat everyone equally. There's no special treatment. And what we want, the goal should be equal opportunity. That's it. So when we talk about women in Bitcoin, women in blockchain, we want to make sure that they're given the same opportunities, that we don't, some women just aren't taken seriously by men. That's just the way it is. And that's not right. Just because you talk to women doesn't mean they're not technically, proficient. So I think it comes down to several things. First, you treat people equally. You have to be aware how women are sometimes looked down upon. And that's not cool, that's not good. At the same time, there's no justification to say why there should be more women or less women in Bitcoin or blockchain. It's condescending in a way to say there should be more women in Bitcoin or blockchain because most women simply aren't interested in it. So that's one thing. The second thing is the basic diversity thing doesn't make sense to me. There's no justification for that except for diversity of ideas and experiences. I believe in that. But people pushing diversity often are hypocrites because they say, treat people as individuals. Don't look at race. Don't look at gender. But turn right around and say, let's get people in based on their gender, based on their race. So you need to pick a lane. Either you treat people as individuals and not as a race or gender, or you say everyone treat them as a race or gender.
But do you not feel that perhaps, God, and if there's any females listening to this and I'm being condescending, I apologize in advance, but do you not feel like male-dominated environments could potentially be intimidating? And potentially for some women, they find it intimidating. There are naturally biological differences, and therefore they might just, veer away from wanting to have an opinion or having a strong opinion, and that some attempts to just have some maybe, say, more female-dominated events. We've got Crypto Springs coming up that is basically organized by a bunch of the best women in Bitcoin, bringing a bunch of people together and just empowering women to then maybe feel a bit more confident to be involved in Bitcoin. And again, I apologize if I sound condescending here because I don't mean to be, but...
No, that's the reality. No, that's the reality is that women are intimidated because this is male dominated. We tend to be more aggressive and loud. I mean, look at me and people like me. We're definitely not always soft and tender. So that is a reality, and that does repel women. But this gets back to a good point, which is we actually do have to treat men and women differently. We do have to be nicer to women if we want them involved in Bitcoin. So that's admitting that men and women are different. And once you can admit that, then there's consequences and there's other implications that people want to then avoid about that reality that men and women are different.
Yeah, I mean, it's a murky area as well because I've recently been looking into the whole area of trans females involved in female sports and the biological differences. There was an MMA fighter who ended up breaking the skull of another woman. There's a cricket player now who's setting records way above. There was a Aussie rules player who ended up breaking someone's leg because there's clear biological differences. So we do start getting into murky areas, starting to talk about biological differences. And sometimes I want to talk about this stuff, and then I feel like even by talking about it, if I get one word wrong or say something wrong, someone's going to be pissed off. I've gone on a tangent here. But taking it back, do you therefore have a problem with events that seem to be more directed towards women? Does that, what is the harm?
Yeah. What I see is the hypocrisy, and that's what really bothers me. I really support women putting on all women events. I really support women saying, hey, this happened a couple of weeks ago, I won't get back into it, but basically a well-known female VC said, hey, I'm looking for an intern. And it's all been guys, yuck, I think is what she said. I fully support her only wanting a female intern. The problem is that it's a double standard. As a man, you can't say, I'm Peter, I'm looking for a male intern for my show. So again, we have to be consistent. If you want to say you can favor certain genders or, give a hand to certain genders or have a certain event towards a gender or a race or whatever, I think it's fine as long as that's applied equally, and it's not. It's only a one-way street with special treatment, and that's what's hard. Women need to be treated differently, I think.
Do you think it's perhaps happening because, if you look historically, if you go back hundreds of years, society was dominated by men. There was a time where women couldn't vote. So do you think there's a historical thing here whereby women have maybe started on a back foot, they've had a disadvantage, and we're not at a point where everything is equal? Or do you think we are equal now?
I don't think we're equal. I think the pendulum has swung the other direction. I think men are at a big disadvantage. There's no special anything for men where it's, like breast cancer raises a ton of money. Where's prostate cancer compared to that? There's nowhere near that. So I think women actually have way more advantages, at least in the West. So it's gone the other way. I mean, male privilege is a joke. There's, at least at a societal government level, absolutely not. So it's gone way too far. And so no, I don't think women need more privileges. I think they have way more privileges than men. And I think that's very easy to prove. But look, I'm married, I have a wife, I have a sister. My nonprofit, the only two presidents I had were both women. And I didn't pick them because they're women. It's just they were badass and they were the best.
Okay. I'm glad you answered that. Okay. I've got no idea how people are going to react to that. I've never approached gender before, and I've been reluctant to. But I did want to bring that up because I know you were vocal about Crypto Springs. I'm attending that event. I know the people who put it on, and you took issue with that event.
Yeah, and some of that was my misunderstanding. So they have an application process.
Yeah.
And I'm so suspicious of any application process, especially for Bitcoin. We're supposed to have transparency and welcome everyone. And the people behind the event have always preached about diversity, and inclusion, yet who are they excluding and why? I talked to Elizabeth Stark about it, and it was just kind of a misunderstanding. But in terms of Crypto Spring...
Are you coming?
No, because I think it looks like a great event, and there's some great women running it, and I think it's wonderful for women. What I don't want to see is, though, hypocrisy. I don't want to see the people putting on this event going back and saying, male privilege, men can't have other men prefer to men. So again, I think the point is that this issue is very complicated, but what isn't is just consistency and a lack of hypocrisy.
But that happens, and that happens at a race level as well. So, for example, in the UK, we have an awards ceremony called Music of Black Origin. Mm-hmm. Okay, I do feel like perhaps cultures, races, genders that have historically been discriminated against have been empowered to maybe create events or awards or ceremonies that actually empower them. So I personally have never found that problem. I don't feel like me, even as a white male, I am discriminated against. I feel like I've got every opportunity I need in life.
That's again goes back to being consistent and not being hypocritical.
Yeah.
So I absolutely support, whatever that event's called, black music, or you have, Latin. You might have scholarships for, Mexican Americans or something, or I support anything where people support their own group, whether it's Jewish, Christianity, white, black, anything. I mean, the fact is we're tribal. Tribes take care of themselves. I support that. Like we have a cable channel in the US called, I think it's BTV, Black TV. It's awesome. People love it. The problem again comes back to hypocrisy. So if you want genders and races to be able to have their own thing, you have to apply that to everyone, and that includes Christians, whites, men.
Okay, all right. Well, listen, thank you for being candid, conscious of time. Let's round up by talking a bit about guns and Bitcoin. Tell me what it is you're working on. Tell people who are going to listen to this what you're working on, how they find out more. It's obviously very interesting.
Yeah, so Guns and Bitcoin is my company that I started last year. We're focused on bringing Bitcoin to gun owners and guns to Bitcoin owners.
Growing the pie?
Yeah. Growing the Pie. We're launching a podcast.
Hey, let me ask you something there. Sorry to interrupt you. So you're obviously talking to a lot of gun owners and introducing them to Bitcoin. Do they naturally just get it more than people outside of the gun world? Is it a natural fit, or do you still have the same difficulty in explaining it?
It's interesting with the gun owners. So a lot of them aren't that technical. Because guns are quite different than technology, which is pretty nerdy. So gun owners are two things. Either they're not as technically adept, so they don't get Bitcoin, or they get it really fast because it's a freedom thing, it's against the state, all that kind of stuff. So kind of bipolar there.
Okay. Anyway, finish up, sorry.
Yeah, so obviously gun owners have recently faced a lot of censorship, especially financial censorship. They get kicked off of, Shopify, YouTube, their channel gets demonetized. All sorts of things, Patreon. So part of Bitcoin is to help them be able to still make a living by accepting Bitcoin. So I'm really focused on kind of the censorship and self-independence for gun owners, especially gun businesses.
And you've got a podcast coming?
Yeah, launching hopefully this week, if darn iTunes will accept us, but we're going to launch it either way this week. And we talk to everyone. We talk to 3D gun printing guys. We talked to some women in Bitcoin who are pretty hardcore. We talked to some Bitcoin experts like Pavlenix from BTC Pay Server. So it's going to be pretty broad, but generally kind of edgier things.
When you say we, who's involved?
My co-host, my co-founder, Chanel Lee.
So there's two of you, present it. How are you finding the recording of interviews?
Very tough. I respect you a lot more because I realize how hard it is to be a podcaster, especially post-production. But my co-founder, Chanel, she's awesome. Again, going back to the women thing, I mean, how many people have a female co-host and co-founder?
Yeah.
But only because she's awesome, not because I'm trying to do her a favor.
I think people, I get a lot of shit, and some of it very deserved, but I think people underestimate how hard it is to make a podcast. I think they think you just turn up and you switch it on. They don't understand the trying to craft an interview, trying to get the right amount of content, get it the production, get it live. It is harder than people actually imagine.
Yeah, I respect you a lot more than other podcasters. It's hard work, but you get to talk to some really smart, great people.
It's great. It's the best job I've ever had.
Yeah.
Well, listen, look, thanks for coming on. Like I said, we've had our bounces back and forth. We've blocked each other a couple of times, but
Yeah.
I think we're friends now.
Yeah.
We should have done this sooner.
Yeah.
And yeah, in a few months, I think we should do it again. There's a whole bunch of other subjects I'd love to get into with you.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back, so thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Okay, so what did you make of that? How was that? Was that helpful? Are any of you out there listening to this finding this issue also complicated? It'd be really interested to see the feedback on this, because I expect many others are finding it complicated like I am. Like, I understand the argument for wanting to own a gun and defend yourself and defend your family. I fully understand, and I find that a very difficult argument to argue against, especially in a country which has so many guns. You know, should you be able to have a gun in your house to protect yourself if somebody comes in to attack your family? And it's a very tough argument to defend against. But I also understand there are a bunch of people who don't like guns. They want to live in a society that has less easy access or almost no access. And I'm not sure how this is ever solved, because we have people who want to be self-sovereign, who want the freedom to make their own choices, but we also have people who want to be part of society without weapons. So in all honesty, no, I don't know the solution. I'm going to keep looking at it and keep trying to find out more and educate myself, because it is a polarizing topic. And no matter what side of the debate you fall on, you're going to catch some shit from someone. And I've seen this, because when I've gone out with a pro-gun attitude, I've seen the responses from people who say, I don't want this around me in their life. And when I've gone with a anti-gun attitude, I've seen the response from people saying, don't take my guns away from me. Who are you to do that? So yeah, very, very complicated. I think in general, I'm still anti-gun. Certainly in the UK, I wouldn't want our laws to be changed here and have easier access to guns. But if I was to live in the US, I would have to consider having a weapon in my house. I don't think it's just an outright no. It is something I would have to consider. I've just grown up in England, which has a very different culture here, and guns haven't been a part of my life like they have been for many Americans. I am, though, as I said, going to continue to educate myself. I'm going to go out hopefully with Ragnar at some point and shoot. There's also some other Bitcoiners I've talked to this about, and I also want to go out with them and shoot. I think I also want to go on a hunt, strangely enough. I want to go and learn as much as I can about this to fully appreciate the topic, and that I can also be respectful of culture and safety. But we cannot get away from the fact there will also always be innocent victims of guns. So what do we do? Should we restrict access because of a minority? Would this even make a safer environment? Would tighter laws even make much of a difference? So this interview was definitely helpful, even though I didn't get to final conclusions. And I appreciate Ragnar giving me his time and also sharing something very private from his childhood. Also, having run into Ragnar a few times on Twitter, he was not who I expected in person, actually. He was a very calm and rational person, gave a very solid defense of all his principles and points. And I can see with him why there is such a close alignment with Bitcoin and guns. So what now? It's a tough one. I struggle to see a reason why anyone needs to own something that's like an assault rifle or an RPG. But though I don't know, I'm still trying to figure this one out. Would removing these high-power weapons really make any difference? Or is it just another point for politicians to argue over and win votes? Does it impose on freedoms? Yes, I'm really, really struggling with this. It's super tough. But yes, just again, big thanks to Ragnar. It was very heavy to hear from him about his dad killing himself when he was a teenager. And I was pretty humbled by the fact that he decided that it was my show that he would share this on, because he hasn't talked about it publicly. And also the fact that he still believes in owning a gun after that really solidifies how much he believes in the right to do so. So yeah, still lots to think about. It's not going to be the last time I touch on this subject. I'm certainly going to speak to more people. I hope people are okay with this and you enjoyed it as an episode. I'm definitely looking forward to your feedback. My email address is hello@whatbitcoindid.com. I look forward to that. Also, just a big thanks to everyone who supports the show, whatever you do, whether you're a patron, whether you listen to the ads, whether you're a sponsor, whatever you do, it's really appreciated. If you are a regular listener, you want to help, there's a support section on my website that explains everything. Just head over to whatbitcoindid.com. And as I mentioned, I'm back off to the States tomorrow, hoping to see some of you out there at Wire Hackathon and Crypto Springs. Either way, have a great week, and I will catch up with you soon.